Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Johnson, the Assistant Dean for Opportunity Programs here at Tandon, and I want to welcome you to the 5th Annual Career Development Panel hosted by Ms. Dede Barlett and moderated by Ms. Amy Copeland. This year's event is very special because it's dedicated to Dr. Iraj Kalkhoran, someone who was very important to the Tandon community. So before we begin the panel today, we'd like to pay tribute to a very special man who really inspired all of us. Now I'd like to invite Ms. Dede Barlett to the podium.
Thanks, Nicole. Some of you may know from last year, I mentioned this, my dad was a Poly alum, and he was also an adjunct professor here for 20 years. This afternoon's moderator, my friend and producer, Amy Copeland, her dad was also an alum of Poly. But when my dad and Amy's dad were here, the student body didn't look like the student body today. Back then, the students were a lot of white, middle-class guys who had the brains but not the bucks to go to MIT. Period, flat stop. The man we honor this afternoon helped change all of that. Iraj Kalkhoran was a master teacher and a master mentor. When I met Iraj 7 years ago, I saw his passion for teaching. I saw his passion for students. I saw his commitment and his deep understanding of what it would take to get more women into engineering and science. When my dad taught electrical engineering here so long ago, there was only one woman in his class. 20 years of teaching and only one woman in class. And that woman did not do very well. In fact, she failed. When I told Iraj that story, he explained the changes he wanted to put into place to help brilliant women excel. He was determined to do that, and he did it. Iraj simply and purely changed lives. He was a brilliant educator who served this university for over 20 years. He was a far-sighted leader who mentored thousands of men and women alike. He understood what it was to be an outsider, an immigrant. He was compassionate and caring. Iraj was quite simply one of the finest men I've ever met. He was loved and he was admired by so many, and you today are his legacy. So let us enjoy the video that Sarah Lee Ramsawak, who worked so closely with Iraj, has prepared. Please roll the video.
Iraj Kalkhoran dedicated half of his life to the Tandon School of Engineering and remained there through all of its transitions and name changes. He began his tenure here at Tandon as a professor in the Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering Department and eventually stepped up into administration, serving as the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs.
If I had to describe Iraj in one word, it would probably be humble.
Kind-hearted.
Always honest.
The word caring.
Clever would be the word.
One word is not enough. I need at least 2 or 3, and it would be compassionate and dedicated to providing our students with the best experience possible.
As a member of the Tandon community for over 25 years, there are many fond memories people have of Iraj.
He became a completely different person when he was in class. It was amazing to me, the way his eyes lit up, and he really enjoyed teaching the students and making sure that they understood the work that they were learning.
So my fondest memory of him would be his support and effort to teach me how to become a strong and independent person.
He was a man of great integrity. He would always give you an honest answer. If he was disagreeing with you, he would know he was disagreeing with you, usually, but he disagreed in a very respectful way.
Iraj will be missed for a number of reasons, both on a personal level and a professional one.
I do miss him because he cared about students and always advocated their causes, and I think we don't have one just like that.
What I would miss most about Iraj is his passion. He was passionate about everything that he did. Even the administrative stuff that he didn't like so much, he made sure that he put his all into everything.
I'll miss the moments that occurred as a result of our rapport, but that existed outside of my state of responsibilities here at Tandon School of Engineering.
My favorite memory of Iraj was he was such a great leader and an advocate for women. And he really motivated me to make sure that we could bring in the best women here at Tandon School of Engineering. And I'm excited to say that we're bringing in our largest class ever of female students here at Tandon, and he would be so happy and proud.
One of my fondest memories about Iraj was how he'd always used to come to the candy dish outside of my office several times a day, and I would look at him through the doorway and catch his eye like I caught him, and then he would laugh and then come into my office and sit down, and we would talk about our day and what was going on. And I really appreciated how he took the time to really speak with me and really cared about what I thought.
Iraj was both an administrator and a member of the faculty. He had a large impact on both the Tandon School of Engineering and its community.
He was so generous to offering me the opportunity to teach his class and to be a mentor during summer research programs.
I learned a lot from him about balancing rules, enforcing the rules, and bending the rules when it's necessary. In the interaction with students, how to really critically look at the pros and cons of being strict and being lenient.
He took time to participate in the department. He took time to teach the courses in the aerospace program, and people remember that and respect that greatly.
He was very much concerned with issues of access and equity with respect to gender. If you look at our department, most of the different units are led by women, and I think that's a testament to his commitment to that effort, to that work.
A person of great integrity, and I really value such people a lot.
Now we'd like to invite the Kalkhoran family to the stage. We'd like to present you with this memento of our deep affection and admiration for Iraj. The inscription reads,
"In loving memory of Dr. Iraj Kalkhoran, a teacher affects eternity. He can never tell where his influence stops."
Thank you all so much for putting this together. It's really touching, and it's really great to know that my dad's legacy is living on here at Poly now that he's no longer with us. I'm his daughter, and I would say it makes me very proud to see how supportive he was of women. And as a woman who underwent many, many years of schooling in science, it makes me really proud to know that, the support he gave me as a woman trying to kind of make it forward in this field, he gave to all of his students, and that really fills us with a lot of pride. And I just feel very fortunate that you guys all get to experience some of the passion that he put into, raising us as scientists and engineers, into you guys as well. So thank you very much again for having us here. We really appreciate it.
It seems fitting that we have our career development panel now following the tribute to Iraj, because this event was inspired and supported by him so much. He loved this event, and he loved it because he knew that while Tandon gives you brilliant technical skills, you need the other piece to be successful. You need the networking piece, which connects you with successful managers, successful women in the technical center and sector who are managing the challenges you will face in the workplace. Nicole and Sarah have assembled a group of 4 amazing panelists, women from diverse companies whose bios are on your seats. We're not going to read the bios. That slows up the conversation that is so vital to this program. This is going to be a lively panel discussion, and it's going to have, I believe you will find, the authenticity that has marked the previous panel discussions. This is not a canned presentation. So please now welcome to the stage Sakaki Brown from Deloitte, Helen Altschalter from Google, Helen, I think I massacred your name, forgive me. Whitney Levine from Grubhub, and Patricia Parad from Edda Technology. And here to make the magic happen is our exceptional moderator, my friend Amy Copeland, former producer for Good Morning America and one of the best event producers working in New York today. Over to you, Amy. Thank you.
Okay, all good. So we have 4 really talented, successful, amazing women. We had some time to get to know each other and to exchange stories and ideas, and each one of them bring a particular perspective and ideas, given that they came out of STEM, basically walked out of engineering with that same question perhaps all of you have, which is, where do I go, how do I get there, what's going to happen, and how am I going to be a rock star? So I'm going to throw a lot of questions at them. I've encouraged them to ask each other questions, and then towards the end we'll do some Q&A. So if you have things that you want to ask them, I hope you will go ahead and do that. I want to cover the whole range of this in terms of, where do you go from point A to point B? Where are the issues around bias? Where are the issues around allies, collaboration, mentors, you name it. So if I ask something and you sort of make a mental note, you can ask for perhaps a more detailed description afterwards. So I'm going to start with Grubhub. Whitney, raise your hand so they know it's you. You had 3 jobs along the way. Talk to us about what that was like. You came out of school. You certainly didn't say, hey, I'm going to Grubhub. So what happened when you came out of school, and how did that particular journey take place?
Okay, so when I graduated, I had actually had an internship at a bank here in New York, and they had offered me a full-time position right out of school as a software developer, and I thought, this is a great opportunity. It's a prestigious company. I can learn a lot. I learned a lot from my internship, so I'll give it a shot. But I was never really sold on finance as an industry that I was particularly interested in, but I wanted to give it a shot. So I worked as an entry-level software developer in finance for about 14 months, and it just wasn't really for me. But what's great about technology is that every industry needs it. And so then I decided that I wanted to try something a little smaller, like a startup, or I wasn't particularly drawn to anything in particular, but I knew it wasn't finance. So I actually stumbled on this online advertising startup that was looking for software developers, and it was like 80 people, and it was exactly the opposite of everything that I didn't like in finance. And I had a great time working there. It was really fun working for a small company. But then eventually, the problems became less interesting, or it started to grow too much, or it just changed from the company that I had thought it was. And then a recruiter actually reached out to me at Grubhub, and I don't know how many of you guys use Seamless here, but I was a big user, big fan. So I said, yes, I'd absolutely like to interview. And that's how I ended up there. But I've been in big companies and small companies, and at this point, I'm coming up on almost 3 years at Grubhub. And it's about the longest tenure I've had at any of these 3 jobs. I was also at the advertising company for 3 years. But, it's been interesting to see all these different perspectives. I didn't have a guided path on the kind of industry I wanted to be in. I just knew I liked software development. But now I've really found a company that's a good mix of, it's a good size for me. I have a lot of opportunity to make an impact and work on the features that I personally use and care about.
Nice. So I hear in your answer that smaller community or the small company is perhaps an advantageous stepping stone. And I think we should explore that a little bit more. Helen, raise your hand. Helen is at Google and is a program manager, but we were talking about the fact that she also launched in a smaller place at Peer IQ. So why Peer IQ? How did you get there? And then what was that giant leap to Google?
Sounds good. It's going to be very interesting to speak right after Whitney, because my story is kind of the opposite of what you described. So I also graduated with computer science degree here in New York City at Pace University. And given that we had such an amazing partnership at our school with the financial space, no surprise that some of my best offers came from financial industry. So I ended up joining JP Morgan and joined as an entry-level software engineer. Back in those days, C++ and Sybase. I believe that they still have that in certain parts of the company. Basically for me, it sort of established what I do for the next almost 2 decades, because I felt like it's important for me not just to apply my technical skills, but to really become a domain expert in whatever it is that the system is supporting, or understand the users and understand how does the data from my system affect other systems upstream and downstream. And through that, I've actually spent many years at JP Morgan, 17 to be exact. I often say that it was like one of those moments where you kind of put your head down and then you raise it, and 17 years have passed. But for me, a couple of things really worked really well in a large company, especially in technology. Being in technology in a large company, the environment was much more friendly compared to, let's say, working on a trading floor. As a technology organization supporting multiple lines of business, we had good visibility into business functions, had a chance to play with new technologies from time to time, aside from supporting legacy systems, of course, there's that too. And ultimately, I rose through the leadership ranks. I was executive director when I left, and I was the head of technology for numerous organizations, including credit risk and later on intelligent data solutions. So that was an opportunity for me to develop an understanding, how does a company create other companies. We were trying to use data as a way to launch new ideas and prototypes, almost like startups, but startups within the bank culture. Now, of course, with that came realization that it's actually very difficult for a bank to launch startups, and while a lot of our prototypes were interesting and successful, the actual development and prioritization would take several years. So at that point, I was already very excited about using data and analytics and creating these new business products that it was not enough for me to just wait. So that was kind of the natural leeway into how do I get into the startup space. And approaching the startups, and that's kind of advice that I would tell anyone here, it's always good to approach from the position of strength as well as growth. And for me, my strength, my domain expertise was in financial services. So when I started looking at startups, I started looking specifically at fintech startups. And this particular opportunity came through a couple of different events and connections, including some volunteering work that I did where I met certain people that knew the founder. So you never really know who you're going to network or who you're going to meet that will lead you in life to your great opportunity. But ultimately, for me, that was exactly like the right fit. I went from a large company where I managed at different points in time up to 75 people to being the first technical hire in a company of 5, and starting with the idea and figuring out how do we build technology out of that idea, and then went on to what I know how to do best, which is grow teams, build teams, hire, build products, and to some extent, like you realize that that's an experience that kind of lasts a few years, and then in a small company, so you often get, especially in a senior role, you often get to the top quickly. So we've built a company, we've built a team, we've built a product. Now it's continuous development of features, selling it to more customers, getting more banks on board, getting more hedge funds, which was the target customer base for our product. And this would be the point where, had I stayed at JP Morgan, I would raise my hand and say, all right, ready for my next challenge. Except in a company of we grew to 25, there really wasn't any other new challenge that I could do. So interestingly, for me, coming out of the financial services space, I used to associate my skill set and my kind of worth in terms of contribution as very closely as financial. But having spent several years as a CTO at a startup, I really started kind of changing how I perceive myself, and I started thinking of myself more as a technologist and less as a financial kind of business person.
I'm going to stop you there because that's an interesting thread. Sakari, you were here with us last year. Mm-hmm. So now I'm hearing software engineer, financial. Do you fall into that same pattern, or is your story different?
No, absolutely not. That wasn't me. That wasn't for me. So I came to school here at what's now Tandon School of Engineering. I got my degree in civil engineering and graduated and went to work in construction. That's just what most of us did. Either we were at a traditional engineering firm or in construction. So my background is not with the computers. That they're great. They make my life easier now, though. And so I spent about a little over a year in construction, hard hat, steel-toe boots, climbing up cranes like the big cranes you see. I've climbed to the top of those. I can tell you a little bit about that. And then I got over it. I was like, yeah, no, over this, not what I thought it was going to be. And then I actually ended up transitioning to Deloitte, which is mainly known for accounting and finance, actually. But Deloitte,
there's that finance piece.
Yeah, right.
New York, yeah.
Yeah, you know. But Deloitte is actually, it's a huge company that does a lot of different things. And so I ended up in the group that focuses on consulting with federal agencies to support their infrastructure, capital projects, and construction projects. So although I'm not with my, steel-toe boots and my hard hat anymore, the work that I do with spreadsheets and formulas and all that great stuff still supports traditional construction and infrastructure projects.
So I'm going to ask Patricia to take this now from a different angle. Raise your hand. They'll know who you are, obviously, by choice of elimination here. Patricia has a different background, and there's a lot of 3D imaging work and cancer therapies work. And so she and I got into this conversation about the whole way that women in this field end up working in medical communities. And I have seen a fair amount of bias in that area. And she and I looked at each other and said, oh, yeah. And so talk to us a little bit. You're doing something brilliant. You're doing work that you are well respected for. Where and how do you deal with the biases when you walk in as a talented woman?
Sure. I mean, I can start by saying that I got in my field because, one, I had an existential crisis in college because I came as a pre-med. So then once I decided midway through college that I did not want to go that route, I was just like, okay, now what do I do? So what ended up happening was that I ended up joining a small startup company that where the COO was an alumni of the undergrad school that I went to. So we got along, and then I worked in the company for about maybe 9 to 10 months. And then as a startup, things happen to startups. Startups can fail, startups can get bought out, startups can go public if that's, the best case scenario. So the startup I joined at the beginning got bought out, which meant that everybody essentially got laid off the company, which was the situation I was in. So then what ended up happening was that as part of my role, I was a part of a number of clinical studies. A couple of them were in New York City. And then one of the research scientists that I worked with was a female professor. She was a computer scientist. She was very, very brilliant. So one day when, my boss called me and he was just like, this company, they're laying off a bunch of people, so I'm sorry this has happened to you. And then literally 2 days later, this research scientist who I was working with, she was the one that vouched for me. She was the one that said, hey, no, we actually need her for these clinical studies. We need her. She's the only one that knows how to do this. She's the only one that knows how to process these images. She's the only one that knows how to read the 3D images. We need her. So then at that point, she was the one who really kind of took stake in my career and who took stake in where I was going next. So I ended up keeping the role in a consulting position for a number of months, for as long as the clinical study continued. And in the field that I'm in, because of how nuanced it is, everybody knows everybody. So I ended up finding my next company because they're like, hey, I know the CEO of the company that I'm a part of now, she knew the previous company that I worked in. She knew how very narrow the field can be and how very the skill set that I got in that first job was very necessary for the next role that I had. But if it wasn't for this person, and she was the first female mentor I ever had, especially as a woman in STEM, you're going to be working with a lot of men. Men are great. I have 2 brothers. They're all great. But I think for me, the turning point was that I had never had anybody take so much stake in my career and take so much stake in where I was going next and who really vouched for me than having her in that position. So that was one aspect of that that really helped me progress to the point that I am now.
So Sakaki, I'm going to throw back to you. I know a fair number of women at Deloitte. Obviously, I know a lot of the men there too. So let's pick up on this theme of a mentor or somebody that really pushes a door open. Mm-hmm. How does that work for you there, and did it work in construction?
So in construction, it was a challenge. It was a challenge for a few layers. I'm African American, and in construction in general, in STEM in general, we're like 3%. And so being out on the field, I got mistaken for the cleaning lady. I got mistaken for the help. It could go on. I could tell you horror stories, right? And so it was like a level to that of even just trying to get respect from the people that hired me. And so in construction, it was a little bit more of a challenge. At Deloitte, I'm fortunate enough to be at a company where our CEO is a woman. And she's out here, showing that it can be done. Deloitte is very big on diversity and inclusion, and so when you come on board, no matter who you are, you get assigned what we call a coach or a counselor. That person is responsible for your career. They're another practitioner. They just will be 2 levels above you, and so my current counselor is a man. And regardless of that, regardless of the fact that it's kind of his duty to make sure I'm successful, I've noticed that he's just really, truly dedicated and passionate about my career and my focus. Unfortunately, interestingly enough, I've had a challenge securing a mentorship relationship with a woman at Deloitte. But that's not to say that that's not possible or that the company has a challenge. I think there just may be certain dynamics there that, whether it's maybe my way of approaching or how to approach or just the availability. There's a bunch of different studies you can read up on in terms of women and mentoring and things like that. But I think particularly I'm happy from where I used to be in my career and the company I'm at now. There are a greater number of resources available in terms of mentoring and sponsorship, which are 2 very different things. I don't know if I have time to kind of just explain it.
Explain it quickly, because I think it is important distinction.
We talk a lot about mentors at this stage in our lives. So mentors, they're someone that you can go to for advice, for guidance. They're going to try to give you the most objective advice and help you along your way. A sponsor is the person that you may know or may not know that behind closed doors is advocating for you and your advancement of whether your career and your education. They're the champions that will go to bat for you. They're the people who will be on the phone calls and say, no, we need him, we need her. So they're 2 different things, and you can't necessarily go up to someone and say, hey, can you be my sponsor? But your sponsor, your mentor can be the same person, but I just want to make sure we understand there are 2 different pieces to that.
No, the clarity there is good. So let's jump to Google, Helen. Sponsors, mentors, but there's a 3rd level, and I'll call that allies. How does that work at Google?
Yeah, so this is definitely an interesting concept that I've seen it's really more fully developed at Google compared to even like financial services that I worked at. The idea is of an ally is I guess the definition of that is someone who's privileged because they are not a minority of whatever minority may be, but recognize the need to provide inclusive environment and recognize the need to do everything that use their position as someone who's privileged in a way to pave the way for minorities of any kind. And there's basically a mailing list of allies, and everyone can choose to be an ally. And you can choose whether you're an ally of a women's organization or ally of a gay organization or whatever that is. Or you can just be an ally and someone that supports making sure that we are fully inclusive. And their role usually is providing support and pointing out inconsistencies. So we have this kind of mandatory training when any new person that joins has to go through it. It's called unconscious bias. Because we've recognized as a company that while blatant discrimination may still exist, for most part, it's gotten more sophisticated, and there are more unconscious biases that create a negative environment rather than direct discrimination. And recognizing those unconscious biases, whether it's a culture bias, age bias, school bias, like Peter went with someone to the same school, or neighborhood bias, all these biases do exist. And it's important to recognize that. So the role of an ally in that situation, let's say you're an ally, and doesn't mean that you had to register as an ally. You can just be an ally as a person, and you're sitting in a room, and someone is saying something negative towards a woman. While we expect she can fully defend herself, and you want to give her that opportunity, and now an ally will stand up and say, "That's bullshit. I've seen that person work, and can we get past this and talk about actual business?" And I've seen this happen in some situations, and like I said, there are always like these unconscious biases that you can see, nothing in the grand scheme, but it's been really interesting to see that this whole role of leaders and role models emerge.
I'm going to jump to Whitney and not necessarily ask a Grubhub question, but more of a career growth question or professional development question. Who do you think, since we're talking about mentors and allies and support, who helped you the most? And then conversely, who was a blockade? Who did you almost want to smack and say, "Get out of my way"?
Those are good questions. Yeah, I know. I was like, I have to put this gently. So in terms of who helped me the most, I would say, so when I was in college, I was the president of the Society of Women Engineers as a junior and senior, and the advisor of SWE. I went to Lehigh University. Our advisor, she actually realized that I was a computer science engineer, and we had worked a lot together, and she suggested, she put me up for a lot of opportunities. She nominated my thesis work. And then one big thing that she really did that helped my career was she recommended that I attend the Grace Hopper Conference, which is much larger now than it was when I went 10 years ago. But it is if you don't know, it's one of the biggest conferences for women in computing in America. And I think now there's actually global versions of it as well. But and so when I went, so she got the computer science department to sponsor my trip. And they sent me there, and they paid for me to go. And actually, while I was there is where I ended up meeting my eventual team at the bank that I interned at and worked at. And so that really opened a lot of doors that I didn't even know this conference existed, let alone like consider going. And she really, and I went by myself, and I was pretty nervous about that, but she was like, "Oh no, you have to go. It's a great opportunity, and like we'll get you there." And so that was huge. I mean, that was a big stepping stone to my career. And I would say that was the first time, and potentially the last time, someone in my career kind of sponsored me, like behind the scenes, at least that I know of. I learned going forward through my career that actually if I wanted to advance or move forward, I had to ask for it. For a long time I was waiting and kind of hoping that my performance would be recognized, and at some of the companies I was at, it wasn't happening. But then I would go and talk to my managers and say, like, hey, I'm ready to move on, I'm ready for the next step, like, how do we get there? And they were like, oh, okay, let's do that. And then we would do that, and then I got promoted to senior level, and now I'm going to be leading a team, and it's because I had to ask for it. So this sponsor that I had in college was a great stepping stone, but then I had to learn after that not to rely too heavily on that and sort of speak up for myself when I feel like I deserved something, which I suppose brings me to like my blockers.
The blockade.
The blockade. I was working at a previous job, and I really felt like I was ready to advance and to get promoted to the next level. And basically, they said I like wasn't nice enough. That's why like I didn't get the job. If we're talking about unconscious bias, I was like more than qualified to get this promotion. But
what did that really mean? What were they really trying to say?
There was a person on my team who was not very kind to me, and I don't know if they were making assumptions about my age or gender or just were generally nasty to everyone. But I did not take kindly to that and would be a little nasty back. But he never got reprimanded or asked to be nicer. And then they basically said like my attitude, I didn't deal with that in a good way. Which is maybe not untrue, but I felt like no one was really stepping up for me either. And so actually when I ended up leaving that company, the VP of engineering, the CTO, the chief data scientist, all were like, I can't believe you're leaving, we'll do anything to get you to stay. And it was like, well, where were you when I was asking for that promotion 6 months ago? So that would be a time where I felt like I was blocked.
Helen, you look like you're dying to jump in. Go.
I felt like there's all of us have stories like this, but what really stood out for me is that you brought up this concept of self-promotion. And it's really important because, especially for the students to understand that you do that at small levels. Even to get your first job, you have to sell yourself, you have to self-promote that. But then people often get confused by the fact that, oh, I have a mentor, a career advisor, all these wonderful people in the company, so they're just going to help me. Google is a really unique example of, but it's not just Google, everywhere it's like that. You need to be able to nominate yourself, and you need to be able to go and validate and show your impact with data. And Google is an incredibly data-driven company, to the extent that promotions are driven by committees. They're committees of peers. So it's not your manager. Your manager can say, no, you'll still get promoted because your committee of peers is going to review all of the data that you submit, and they will say, she's or he is operating at the next level because we see all that data and we've compared that across. But it's really important that very first step in conscious decision, I'm going to nominate myself. And it was an interesting data point. At some point, a survey was done that found that women were half less likely to click that box that says, I want to nominate myself. So just by simply sending out an email saying, we've noticed that women are not clicking in a box as often as men. Women, if you feel like you're ready for the promotion, please click that box. And just by doing that, that'll increase the percentage of women that have come forward to nominate themselves for promotion. So both a combination of knowing that when you're ready and raising your hand, I'm ready, but also collecting data that supports, be it code reviews, a number of changes you submitted, or documents that you've written, or designs that you commented on. Creating that portfolio during the year that you want to nominate yourself is very important. And really in any company, not just Google, but we definitely take it to the next level.
Patricia. Doctors don't work that way. What, did you want to say something? Sakari, go, and I'll hold my question for you in a minute.
Because in honor of Professor Kalkhoran, I didn't have him as a professor, but on the topic of self-promotion, I well, before I got to know him, I was very scared of Professor Kalkhoran, and he was awesome, but he could, be intimidating. And so I said, man, this guy, he's always supportive of so many things, but I never got a chance to meet him. So we went to a conference, and we won an award, like the chapter, National Society of Black Engineers, we won an award or something. So I said, you know what, I'm just gonna self-promote. I didn't know that was what it was at the time, but I was like, I'll just send it to a few people that I think at the school would be interested. And I just looked up Professor Kalkhoran and a few others, and I sent it, and Professor Kalkhoran responded like right away. He had never met me before, but he was like, oh, Sakaki, congratulations. And from that point on, whenever I saw him like in the line for grabbing coffee, we always speak and say hi, and then at that point he knew, he kind of had a point of reference. Never had a class with him, never had that necessarily one-on-one connection, but once again, just that action of self-promotion then, create a relationship or connection with someone who could then possibly have been a sponsor for me behind closed doors. Like, I don't know, but I just wanted to share that tidbit since we're, honoring Professor Kalkhoran today.
Yeah, the promotion piece is so huge. I mean, even with a lot of the coaching I do, people, and more women than men, I have to say, will say to me, I don't know I didn't get that promotion. I work so hard. Well, working hard is lovely. It's very different than marketing yourself and promoting yourself, and it's a critical piece in terms of how that moves forward. So, Patricia, I'm back to you. You serve as a liaison. With, on the computer side, the medical side, doctors. Where does the whole mentor role fit in? Where is the bias, if any? And then how do you promote what you do?
Sure. So I kind of wanted to go off of what Sakaki said, is that a lot of times people take, the term like networking as something very transactional. It's very like, oh, let me go to this networking event and like, I'm gonna find my next job, I'm gonna find my next client. And I think that's a very, very misguided approach to networking, because the way I think people should look at networking is network in a way that you can help somebody. You guys are all young, you all have a skill set that a lot of employers will need and currently do need, and I know a lot of you are probably like, oh, I don't know what I'm gonna do next year, I don't know, I need a job, blah, blah, blah. Look in the terms of how you can help somebody. You're gonna meet people who need what you can offer. So if you come, and I know like, for me, when someone says, oh, I need to go network, and I think in my mind, like, it shouldn't be a transaction. It should be an exchange. It should be a point where you're looking at how you can help somebody in the way that will enhance your growth, enhance your skill set, in a way that you can learn from. So that's like one thing I wanted, like Sakaki just reminded me of when she just had her answer, is that this is going to be, this is going to be a common theme, and you're always going to need to be in networking after college. And I think one thing, that needs to be emphasized is, something I read in a book was that you need to network before you need it. Mm-hmm. So, which means that, so that means that, like even in an event, like a small event where you might not need a job, or you might not need to pitch a client, there are people who might help you. Might not be them exactly, but it might be somebody they know. So like, I don't know, that's just like one thing that came in my mind as soon as like Sakaki.
Sakaki, all right, so pick up on that networking thing.
My life, right? I had to learn that, and I learned it here, actually, just the power of networking is not transactional. The person you meet today, you may not necessarily need anything from them today, but 3 years down the line, you may have, you meet me today, you're like, man, I really like Deloitte, or, man, I really like Google, and then you're like, oh, I remember this person from the panel that I spoke to. And I learned that just because when I was here, school was a little rough for me, like classes, especially when I got into the design part. I don't know if there are any civil engineers out there, but it was just a little rough towards the end. And so the folks in the TRIO office, like Nicole over there, who had my back, and some of the counselors, and then some of the professors too, because they knew me as a person from the beginning, they knew I tried as hard as I could. Having that network from an academic perspective helped me later on. I couldn't necessarily have seen that coming in as a first year or second year student, but towards the end it was very crucial. And in the same case with how I transitioned into my new job from construction, a lot of times I just reached out to people on LinkedIn I didn't know that had careers I was interested in, but then the last nail in the coffin was someone I met at my old company who was leaving to go to Deloitte. I hadn't really heard of Deloitte hiring engineers or civil engineers. And because I kept that connection, she was like, oh, if I see anything, I'll send in your resume. And sure enough, a year later, that's what happened. So, that's why I was really just like, story of my whole life. So, it doesn't have to be transactional. It doesn't have to be scary. You could just come and say hi to someone or, hey, I liked your shoes, whatever it is. Just hold on to that contact and then just, stay in touch.
So you've all talked about different lengths of times in jobs. Whitney, how long can you stay in a job? Should you stay in a job? What's too short? What's too long? Or are there no rules anymore?
I wouldn't say there's no rules, but it's definitely different than it was for, let's say, my parents' generation. Anecdotally, my mom just left her job after like 30 years and was like, I haven't interviewed in a really long time, and was asking me for advice because I've interviewed several times over the last 10 years. But I would say, like, especially when you're first getting out of college, like, it's okay to try different things out. I don't think you want to be jumping around every few months. And we've seen resumes come through at Grubhub where, someone's had 6 jobs and hasn't stated any of them for longer than a year. And then you start to think, okay, this person might not be in it for the long haul. But a lot of the people from when I graduated are also on their second and third jobs at this point. And I think it's okay to look around until you find something that's a good fit, within reason. But I would definitely say, we talk to people and candidates all the time who have had experiences at a lot of different companies in a 10-year span, and it's really not uncommon, and it doesn't, at least for us, doesn't reflect poorly as long as they can show that they've done really significant work while they've been there. And hopefully, when you find, I now coming on 3 years, like, I'm not itching to leave like I have at this point in the past. And hopefully, you eventually find yourself in a place like that.
Yeah, I would just add to that, leave when you're not challenged and you don't see an opportunity to grow or change things where you are. So a lot of people are afraid to just recognize that I'm no longer being challenged. I am falling into this comfortable zone. And that's usually a good signal. And it doesn't happen too quickly. My personal rule is that it takes you 2 years to really develop your expertise in whatever it is that the business domain you're supporting, even if it's as a software engineer. And my also personal rule is that if you're managing people, then it's great for career stability to stay with them for at least 2 to 3 years. But in general, I feel like leaving when you're not challenged is a good benchmark.
But I think even, sorry, I was just going to say, when I was first graduating, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to make sure I pick the right thing. It has to be this is about my career, and I have to make the right choice right away. And you do want to be, I personally believe you do want to be thoughtful about it, but it's not like the end of the world, and there's opportunity to move on if it ends up not being the right fit.
Well, just to add to that is remember, your career isn't just, a slope. You're going from here and you're going up here. It's going to be a sinusoidal wave. You're going to have times where you might have to leave the workforce because you have a parent that's sick. And then, how are you going to re-enter? How are you going to explain to this new employer who's interviewing you that you were gone for a year? And I think we tend to think you just keep going up and up and up and up and up. But it's usually not the case where you're just going to keep moving up and nothing's going to happen, and there's nothing that's going to impede you unless you take a lot of stake in this job. But it's more like your career is like this. Don't think the first job you have out of college will immediately determine where you're going to be for the rest of your life, because it's not. And especially now that in the way the field is set up is the employee has a lot more leverage in many cases than the employer. So employers are looking for good talent. So you have more opportunity than you think you do. And I think coming out of college, the first job isn't going to determine your career for the rest of your life. It'll give you a skill set that you can bring to your next job, and then it'll give you another skill set that will bring to your next job, and hopefully you'll meet new people who might be able to help you refine that skill set, help you determine how you can work to your strengths. And careers aren't intended to just be start and finish. It's not.
You almost want to think about it, and this was, I guess, something we learned way back when, that instead of it being a ladder, it's a lattice. And you may be moving all over this lattice. We're talking so much here about the career and the move and the movement. What about you? What about the whole side of time for you, time for self-care, time for who here is going to the gym, taking time to breathe, to live, to play, to eat right. Sakari, how do you make sure you take care of you?
It's been a challenge. I've had to learn through trial and error. My latest passion is Soul Cycle. I don't know how many people have tried Soul. Yeah. If I had time, I would have gone down the street and taken a class, trust me. So that's been my escape. I can just give a very recent example. So unfortunately, last week I lost my grandfather, and so I had to come here out of the blue for a week and, kind of deal with my family and all of that. In the same week, I found out I got promoted. So last week I got promoted. And then in the same week, my relationship of 2 years ended. So those three huge things happened over the last 2 weeks. And I think for the first time, to be honest, in a while, I realized that I needed to take a break. Because for the last year, I haven't taken a real vacation. And so, unfortunately, this has been trial and error. And sometimes that happens. You think you're like, yeah, mental health. Yeah, I got it. Soul, all the time. Yoga, but sometimes you learn when things kind of just stop you in your tracks. And so for me, coming here today was important to me because, it's great to meet, and I'm back home, and it's comforting. But then next, tomorrow and then next week, I'm going to take the week off. So, I've done things with fitness. Church has been very helpful for me. So if you're in faith, getting in tune in that space has been helpful. But, sometimes you have to just learn, unfortunately, and that's been my story.
Yeah, I would never call myself, I guess, a role model for work-life balance, but it's been continuous struggle, especially in finance as well. Ever since I had kids, I have two kids. One is now 16 and one is 13. So now things are much easier, although college topics and lots of other things, teenagers are actually much more difficult than babies. I would have baby anytime over a teenager. But at least from just getting a time and commitments, that things have become easier. And throughout my kind of whole career as a working mom, I've always looked at, whenever I would get questions, especially in leadership roles, if you go on a panel, people love asking you about work-life balance. My answer always would be, I evaluate work-life balance not on a daily basis, but on a monthly basis. And within a month, if I've come to my daughter's music performance or dance performance sessions, if I've found a time to speak with my son's teachers, if I found a time to spend some time on the weekend just as a family event, and if I needed to take my kid to the doctor in the middle of the day that I've been able to do this, I feel pretty okay with my work-life balance. But on a day-to-day, it always fluctuated. And Google is a much better employer than anyone out there. But a lot of it is self-driven. We all want to succeed. We all want to deal with the latest crisis and give it all we've got. So knowing when, like you said, such an important thing, knowing when to take a pause, it's on you, and no one's going to find that for you.
At Deloitte, we call it work-life fit. We try not to say balance because it kind of implies that it has to
pressure
be.
When you say balance, if it's not balance, you're doing it wrong.
Right. So we try to use the term work-life fit. So even at the student level, between classes, if you work, if you got clubs and organizations, try to take the work-life fit. How can you make it fit for where you're at in life right now?
Yeah, think of it as a scale. Some weeks, some months, work is going to take over your life because you have a giant project due. So which means you might not go to the gym as often. That's okay. Next month, the scale might shift. So I think if they're not equal, that's fine. That's okay. Life isn't like that. So it's a matter of tending to what's important to you at the moment, and then sort of prioritizing in that sense.
There have been a number of people that have asked in I guess the coaching work that I've done, should I take this particular job? And the criteria or the question was more around what's the culture of this particular company. So Whitney, how much does the culture of the company matter And how do you decide, should I take that job?
I would say the culture is one of the biggest factors I would consider in taking a job. I think culture is a combination of how much personal time, not necessarily like vacation time, but how much time do I have to go to the gym? Is it okay to leave early if I have to? That sort of ability to take time is important. How often do we hang out together? For a pub we're having happy hours and social events and things like that. I think all of that is a huge part of it because that's what you're living day to day. You want to do interesting work, but like if you're having a tough time with the people that you're working with, or you're, I don't know, not having fun. Not that it's all about fun, but it makes a big difference. I think my favorite jobs in the couple that I've had have been about working with people that I really like spending time with. And a lot of those places had social events and let us do just gave us flexibility. So I think, everywhere I've worked, I've done interesting technical things, and I've worked with smart technical people, and I've built great technical tools. But the difference between what I've liked and I've not liked has been the people and the time for myself.
Talk to me about Deloitte for a moment. Deloitte had, for I think a while, not recognized the importance of that kind of, I'll call it integration, you call it fit. What's changing now for the larger companies versus the startups? Yeah. And when you're choosing where do you want to go, does one offer an advantage over the other?
Yeah, so I think what Patricia said it earlier, just with the way the industry is set up now, employees have a lot more leverage. And so I think companies like Deloitte and other big four accounting firms started to see that in terms of retention, it was horrible. So the folks who came in first year, maybe campus hires or maybe just first year experience hires, were not staying long term. And so when they started to dig a little bit deeper and to figure out why, a lot of it was around work-life balance. And so if you know anything about the finance industry or consulting industry, depending on your client, if you're commercial, federal, your hours and balance at that time could be very difficult. In some spaces it still is. And so I think with that information and that data, going back to importance of data, that's where that shift in culture started to come into place. So you have things like working from home. They give us $500 every year to do whatever we want as it relates to well-being, and that's how I do my SoulCycle classes. And things like that. We get, in addition to holidays, we have what they call well-being days. So if, let's say, Christmas is on a Tuesday, we'll get that Monday, maybe that Friday before off. I actually just got an email that we're getting the whole week of Christmas off, so that's phenomenal. That's, I think, where it came into play. And when you look at small companies and big companies, I think it really is where you are in your particular life. So if you're really interested in hands-on from the bottom up, maybe you're not necessarily big on being a small fish in a big team or company like a Deloitte or Google or whatever the case is. A small company may be a good opportunity. I would just recommend that you make sure you ask those questions as it relates to culture and what you may be looking for. If you do need to work from home, just say, hey, can we set up a telework agreement? Is that possible here? So it's not to say you can't get those same benefits. It may just be a little bit different arrangement at a smaller firm versus a huge mega corporation.
You mentioned the interview process or the questions you want to ask. I think a lot of people are very concerned about what questions they can ask in an interview. When you interview for people at Google, what are you hoping they ask?
We usually look at obvious interest in the field, but also in the research itself. So are you asking questions that relate to specific how company works, or are you asking questions because you've studied something relevant that you think is applicable, and you're trying to understand how do we approach that particular problem? So it's always good to kind of find relevance in what you study and bring that to your interviews, even as follow-up questions. So I've done that personally, and in every single case, it's worked really well when I interview for a new job, and I've done that a few times. after an interview, I follow up, but I don't follow up, oh, it was great meeting you, thank you for your time, because everyone else does that. So what my approach to this is that I'm going to, during that conversation, remember a particular topic that the interviewer brought up that I'm curious about. I'm going to go and research that topic. I'm going to build my own opinion, and in my thank you note, I'm going to include that having thought through that particular topic, I've actually got lots of new interesting ideas like this and this and that. Really a paragraph, no more, because people don't like reading long emails. But I feel like in almost every case, you have nothing to lose, and for me personally, in every case, it paid off. These were the emails that I get immediate response from people. Whether they're hiring or not hiring, I can now add them to my network, and this is starting to build a longer-term relationship.
And I think interviews too, and I've interviewed both as an admissions representative for my undergraduate college and as an employer. Interviews are two-way. So that means that when you go in an interview, it isn't intended to be interrogative, like, hey, why do you think you're a good fit for this company, and that's it. This company is also trying to pitch themselves to you. Yeah. So the idea is to, find out, like what Whitney was talking about earlier, find out if the culture is a fit for you as well. And then some of those questions that you might come up to find out those answers, you can bring up in your interview. Because it's two-way. Interviews are two-way. Again, like to emphasize, employees have a lot more leverage than they used to. So, yeah.
Sakari, what do you wish somebody told you while you were in school? What?
No. So I wish someone told me that, a few things, that failure isn't permanent. No matter how small or how big it is, it's not a permanent thing. You will get through it, you'll get over it, it'll be fine. And then speaking a little bit on career and longevity, that the first job I had did not dictate where I'd be, 20, 15, even 2 years from now. I think those two things, I wish I got a little bit more.
All right, Helen, you have to pick two other things, or something else. What do you wish someone told you?
I think mostly just discovering that you will work with very different kinds of personalities, and learning to adapt your style to different personalities is super important. And especially for me personally, it was more moving from the more junior to more senior roles within different companies that I worked at. The things that work for you at a more junior level suddenly stop working for you at a more senior level. People perceive what you say differently, people react to you differently, and learning to adapt not just to personalities, but also to your personal level and the level of the people around you has been an interesting discovery for me. It'd be fun if someone gave me good examples early on.
So Whitney, a reverse. I give you the microphone and I say, you now have everyone here. What do you want to tell them?
Well, I think speaking to what I was talking about before, like how important it is to speak up for yourself and be your own best advocate. I feel like I always heard the stories of people saying like, oh, there's been a lot of studies where women aren't asking for it or they're not speaking up for themselves. And I was like, yeah, I know, but like, that's okay. I'm doing a good job. And like, and then I started speaking up for myself, and like my career started growing and moving. And I've since spoken to more junior women that I work with about doing the same thing. They've said to me, I'm not sure about what I'm working on, and I think I want to try something new, or I think I'm ready for a bigger role. And I'm like, okay, you got to ask for it. And they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't think it's going to work. And I was like, no, you should just ask for it. And then they've come back to me and been like, oh, I asked for it and now I'm getting it. So just ask for it, ask for what you want. And there's ways to say it tactfully, or to tread lightly and make sure you're doing right by your career. But if you know that you deserve it, you need to just ask for it.
Okay, Patricia, you have now a challenge because you can't repeat anything anyone said.
Well, I'm going to start by speaking in the context of transitioning from school to work. Is you're going to have to be a lot more intentional about everything, whether that's making sure you work out, making sure you cook healthy, making sure you're getting time with your friends, because you're not going to be in the same space all the time anymore. Yeah. So that's one thing I really had to learn, and I had to sort of ingrain in myself, is that everything is going to have to be intentional, and that includes asking for a raise, asking for your promotion. Is no one's just going to give it to you. You're not going to have your parents telling you, hey, you should apply for this, this internship. And in that respect too, one of the things I started to learn was that I suppose this happens more later in your career, but like work to your strengths. Like a lot of times I kind of fell back into what I wasn't good at. My undergrad was in biomedical engineering, and when I graduated from college, I kind of got a little, I had a problem with it not being a strict engineering discipline, such as electrical, mechanical, or chemical, in the sense that it's more of an application of these engineering disciplines. So when I was joining a new startup company, it was like I kind of fell back in my weakness, like, hey, like I'm not actually like an expert in programming, or I'm not an expert in building, circuit boards. But I started to look more into my strengths, in that like I could bring all of these together and apply it to certain application in biomedical engineering. So I think that's also one thing I wish somebody had told me, was that don't fall back on what you're lacking. Work towards your strengths, and that will take you further than ever trying to fix what you're bad at.
I'd love to open up, see what you all would like to ask. I have more questions for the panel, but I'd rather do an interaction here. Do we have mics?
Yeah, we have mics.
Or do you want people to just, yes, we do have mics. All right, so just if you raise your hand, someone will bring you a mic and tell us who you are. Here in the front row, somebody with a, okay. You have to stand up and tell us who you are.
Is that on?
Yeah, we can't, if the mic team would put her mic on, or.
This works.
Yeah.
Hello, hi, good afternoon. My name is Sahar Khan, and I have a question for Sakari. So you mentioned that you were a civil engineer and you transitioned into the consulting and finance world. And when you first did that, did you have the experience, like from going from a construction company to a finance company? Don't they usually want like experience in accounting, especially Deloitte being one of the big four? Yeah. So how did you go on about that?
Sure, that's a great question. So traditionally, no, I didn't study accounting or finance or economics, any of the traditional roles. But based on the group, because what you'll learn about the large firms, no matter if it's accounting or not, there are subgroups that focus on specific things. So, just as an example for Deloitte, the group I was trying to get into was specifically focused on infrastructure and capital projects. They needed people with construction, civil engineering experience. The challenge became in tweaking my resume language so it was less construction, heavy civil, technical, and started to display my management capabilities, because that's really what the big piece was. Like, they didn't question whether or not I knew how to do the calculations. They didn't question if I understood construction. It was like, okay, where are your soft skills, and how can you translate what you did? Yes, we saw you watch concrete pours, but how does that matter to, if one of our federal agencies? It's like, okay, well, I managed a team with this schedule, saving money of this amount, and so that's where the challenge came. So I didn't have that traditional accounting background, but because I focused on translating the engineering or civil language to management consulting, it ended up working out.
Hi, my name is Rosaura, and I have a question. So going off the resume thing, so did any of you change your resumes quite often to fit different interviews and different job, like just different job interviews? Is I remember I was talking about last time, different internships require different things, so you change it up. So did you guys do that quite often, or did you guys kind of leave it mostly the same?
Depending on how much work experience you have, yes, you have to tailor it. I had to, for certain positions, if I was if I was applying for a research position versus an industry position, I would, probably omit a job that wasn't as important. But also when it comes to writing your resume, talk about your accomplishments. say like at this job, at this position, like you did a presentation at the end of your lab term to a team of like 40 people on your findings. And I think, because I think with resumes, a lot of times we talk about what we do and not what we have accomplished.
Yeah, I would add to that, and to Sakari's point around translating what you did and how that affects, or how that gives you a transferable skill is the most important. So anything that you do, maybe you transferring between industries, you want to give a sense that you understand that domain space. So let's say like your 2 bullets are gonna show you deep domain expertise because you're gonna use whatever lingo is. But then your next like 3-5 bullets are going to talk about the accomplishments, but specifically how they are applicable to other industries as well. So I personally have always had one resume. I'm a big believer that if you can find a thread, like a common thread throughout your career, you can do really well with one resume. But that's because I had a common thread throughout my entire career that was leadership in software engineering, and be it at a startup or at a large company, finance or not finance, that doesn't matter. But interestingly, a friend of mine who in his career was a lawyer, is a product manager, management consultant, and is now applying for a job. My advice to him was, you need multiple resumes, because any person, any place you send that sees you've got multiple themes, they get confused. They don't know what to do with that. But that's the only distinction I would say.
There's a question here.
Question in the front row over here.
Right here.
Yeah, she's
waiting for a little while.
Hey, I'm Alex, and I would just like to ask about the whole...
It's okay. No, we'll let Alex go, and then you're next, so stand by. Okay, back to Alex. Go.
So, keyword searches. So
I need to...
Can you stand up, Alex, wherever you are? Thank you.
I couldn't see you.
I couldn't see him either.
Okay, so I've heard about keyword searches and how recruiters sometimes use keywords to identify which resumes have what they're looking for and the precise qualifications they're looking for. And this leads me to like a more general question of how do you present yourself in a way, because I think that employers have very specific qualifications, and like how do I present myself in a way that like speaks to all those qualifications, and if I'm aiming for a job that's like quote unquote slightly out of my league, like how do I still play that up? Like, anyways.
Who wants to take it? Whitney.
I'll go. I can't speak specifically to the keyword searches because I don't look through the entire stack of resumes. We have a recruiter, and then she'll give me filtered versions of those resumes. But I will say, like, as someone who's interviewing, I don't personally care about the language that you use, the programming language that you use, or like the tools that you use to get the job done. I like to know the type of experience that you have and that you understand how and why you use those tools, but I don't care that it's Java or that it's this database or that it's whatever. So as someone who's hiring, I would say that those keywords maybe aren't important. I can't tell you how we get to that point where we filtered out resumes. But I will say, like, what you should really focus on is like showing that you are someone who can do the job, right? That you can solve the problem, that you have the experience that's relevant to build tools, or that you've thought about this type of problem before, because like the more specific tools and languages and things you can learn on the job. But if you're someone who's like had the opportunity, that's what I want to see on a resume, is that like those things.
Yeah, my advice would be sprinkle them thoughtfully, because yes, there's an element of that. And actually I have a friend who's been very successful, and just for the fun of it, he decided to make his resume almost entirely out of these keywords, just to see what happens. And he did get lots of hits. So like it or not, it does exist. And he did get called into lots of interviews, and he managed to do great in many of them. But that's because he as an individual had a lot of accomplishments that go with those keywords. Have you done just the keywords alone? I think your result, and you'll be burning those bridges going forward. But what I often suggest to software developers especially is instead of listing like languages and like 10 things that you list there and software tools, sprinkle them within the description. Like, I want to know how you use that. Yeah. I want to know how you use particular languages, particular technology tools, or continuous integration environments to solve a specific problem. Or at Google, we look at scale. Like, have you applied these skills, be it languages to process large data sets, or parallelization across multiple compute nodes, things of that nature.
Okay, front row.
Hi, my name is Brittany. My question is more technically focused. So while you're in your career, what approach do you guys take to discern like what languages you want to like make sure you know how to code in, and what tools you want to make sure you know how to use to remain competitive?
With me? I mean, we can both. Go ahead. I can start.
Yeah, Helen, and then maybe Whitney, and then Patricia.
Yeah, we've got lots of different. So start, and someone mentioned that, I think Patricia, that from the position of strength. Pick a language, doesn't matter what that is. It's helpful when it's mainstream. Java, C++, Python, Go, JavaScript. Like those five are, I would consider mainstream languages that lots of other languages are similar to. And start and become an expert in that one language. Because when we interview in banks or Google or startups, we want to know that you're proficient in whatever language you chose, because that gives us confidence that you can develop the next set of skills in a different language. But if you're trying to do a lot of the different, kind of go after buzzwords that you want to be able to pass a Java interview and a C++ or a Node or anything like that, that reduces your ability to develop that proficiency.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with focusing on like a more mainstream language. I think when you're looking for, there's probably a better chance it's going to be used somewhere, and then there's less of a learning curve. But generally, like when it's been tools outside of those main parts of the job, I've been able to learn them on the job or be able to experiment with them on the job. So I particularly work on search currently at Grubhub. So when you're looking for like places to eat or food that you're interested in, restaurant and food discovery. And I didn't really know a lot about search before I got to Grubhub. And so I've gotten to learn on the job the differences between the different search technologies and what they're best at doing. I've been to search conferences now. And that's not necessarily something I prepared for in going to the job or the interview. So like there's definitely the opportunity to learn. I guess the short version is that I don't think you have to pick something specific to learn outside of like just the more common things, because you'll have the opportunity to try and play on the job.
Another question.
Hi there, my name is Jacob. This question's for Ms. Brown. It's pertaining your transition from Clark Construction to Deloitte. I'm kind of curious what type of training they put you through when you went to Deloitte coming from a construction background, if any.
Yeah, sure. So it wasn't specific to just me because of, coming from a different field. But we have this really cool place called Deloitte University at Deloitte. So everyone, it doesn't matter, where you're coming from or, where you're going, you have to go to Deloitte University. I think it starts off for a week. And it's this place in Westlake, Texas. Everything there is free. Food, Starbucks is free, everything. The gym is amazing. I'm telling you, it's amazing. And so the first training that you typically go to, let's say if you're coming in as an experienced hire, that's what I'll speak to, is, it's just a lot of getting to know your strengths. It's big about learning your strengths, learning how to then take those strengths and understand how to work in different environments with those strengths with different people. There's a few simulations you'll have to do just with getting your thought process working about how to interact with clients, because as a consultant, that's a lot of your job, how to deliver presentations, how to speak. So that's really what the big transition was. Luckily for me, I got a lot of those things, the foundation for those things here at Tandon, but some people didn't necessarily have that. And if you're a traditional engineer who may be like very introverted, don't really like public speaking or, all those sorts of things, it's a great way to get you now into the space of, yes, you are awesome with coding, you're awesome with finance, but we need you to be able to speak to what you do. And so that was a big part of that training. And like I said, that's for anyone who's coming in, not just, if you're coming from an industry different than finance or accounting. No problem.
Question. Back there and then the front row here.
Hi, I'm Amy, and as someone interested in applying to PhD programs, I was just wondering what your opinion is on going straight from like your undergrad to grad versus working in the industry first.
Patricia, you want to
Sure.
take that?
So I had a little gap. I got my master's degree a couple of years after I got my undergrad. There are multiple factors to consider when you want to go straight for your PhD or whether you want to go, go into industry for a bit. I'll just address the elephant in the room. If you're going for, let's say, your salary, what I've experienced, and I work in an environment with all PhDs, is that it makes sense more to go into industry first than pursuing a graduate degree. Because you're going to start off with like a certain salary. You might have that salary increase a couple of years, and then you go into grad school and your salary is going to increase a lot once you graduate grad school because you have the basis of your time when you're in industry before you went to grad school. If that's your pursuit and like you want to go into industry after you get your PhD, I would suggest that maybe you spend some time, one, to figure out if the PhD you want to pursue is exactly what you want to pursue, but two, to have the industry experience and you can see where the industry is actually going to see what you want, like let's say your dissertation to be on. If you're going and you want to be a tenured faculty member, I don't think it matters. I think you can go straight from undergrad and it won't impact your ability to get a tenured faculty position after your PhD. But otherwise, I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
I mean, personally, I thought I was going to go get my master's degree in civil engineering, but that changed quickly. And that was a lot just because of the internships I had as a student. I started to see it just sounds nice to get a master's degree. I don't really want it or necessarily need it for what I'm doing. But now, I'm thinking about going back to school, but I have some friends who ended up in PhD tracks, and a few of them are, one is a tenured professor now, but he actually worked at Intel for a little bit. And another one went straight through, and now he doesn't work as in academia, which was his original goal, but now he works for McKinsey, which is another consulting firm, but does very technical stuff. So I think to Patricia's point, it just depends on what your end goal might be, but I do recommend at least getting some sort of industry experience so that it can help you figure it out.
We're back here in the front.
Hi, my name is Deandra Wright, and Whitney, you had mentioned earlier that your mom, after leaving a job of 30 years, was asking you about interviewing and how that would work after staying in a job for so long. So my question to you and to everybody is how to maintain those interviewing skills in a job that you already are pretty comfortable in and try to kind of avoid having to bulk up again right before interviewing for a next stage.
That's a very good question. One thing that I do is I will continue to go to networking events or actually sometimes just accept interviews even if I'm not interested in leaving, just for the practice. And sometimes, I'll stop after a phone screen and say, thank you, I'm going to stay in my current role, but I appreciate the time, let's have a conversation again in the future. And it's helped me build relationships for potential future jobs, and it's just kept me fresh on interviewing. This happens a little bit later in your career, but interviewing has made me a better interviewer. Now that I interview people for jobs, I think that's helped me. So I've talked a lot to my mom about that. You've been doing that all this time. Think about what you like out of those people and bring that to the table. But I think just generally, be comfortable talking about yourself and your skills and practice. That's the best thing I can say. It's hard. It's really hard. I find it hard. I'm uncomfortable talking about myself, and I sometimes doubt that my skills are as good as my peers, and so just becoming more comfortable in speaking to my strengths and practicing them.
I would say often the hardest part is also keeping your resume up to date. Certainly for me, after staying at JP Morgan for 17 years, I never had to interview. I switched lots of jobs, but I never had to get my resume updated. It was always a conversation about my accomplishments. So the day that I decided that I was going to look for a job elsewhere, all right, 17 years of accomplishments in one weekend was kind of challenging. So Google has a great approach to this, mostly to help you communicate your accomplishments on a regular basis. We call it snippets. It's something that's not mandated, but their system exists, and it's generally encouraged, and we send out reports as a way to inform people what's happened this week. So on a week-to-week basis, you are asked to just put a couple of bullets of what you've done that week. It goes out to your manager, it goes out to your peers. You can put nothing, that's fine as well. But it's a way to look back at a year and helps you to write self-performance, self-assessments, which also, we didn't talk about this, but in any company, large or small, you'll need to twice a year or once a year document what you've accomplished. So keeping these snippets, these small notes, whether you keep it in a doc or in some official system, has been a good way to refresh and update yourself.
So my name is Bill, and I have a technical issue. I have the technical question for Whitney. It's like, so currently my department asked me to build a website, like to take in user input. To be honest, I really like the GitHub user interface, and I'm just curious, like what kind of language or kind of model that you guys use to build up that like front end, like user interface. Because I never get a chance to ask that question to someone who is actually working in a big firm as an engineer. So.
What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
What?
I missed the second part of your question.
No, it's like I never have the chance to talk to like the real engineer for work.
And you're it.
Well, I'll preface this by saying that I'm on a back-end API team, but our website is built in mostly Angular. That's the framework that they use to build the front end. So the way that the system works is we build a bunch of like microservices, which are just tiny services that represent one single function. So there's a payment service, there's a search service, there's a et cetera, carding, checkout, all that stuff. And they're all these individualized services. And then we have front-end teams that actually work on building the user interface. So there's Angular for the website, and then there's iOS and Android teams that build the mobile apps, and all those front-end teams are actually constantly interacting with these service layers. And so the same search service that's powering the website is also powering the mobile apps, and so the teams work very closely together. We also do a lot of like user research, so that people actually can like play with the UI and come up with different things. I don't know if that answers your question about the technical stack of the front end, but Angular is like the main programming language, and then in the back end we use like Java and things like that.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
So what would be the difference from like building the website like from scratch instead of like using the model, like the Angular like you talk about?
Well, I think like the point of using frameworks is they have a lot of built-in tools already, so you're not rebuilding the wheel, right? Like we don't need to create buttons. That's a thing that exists, but we put our own kind of design on top of that. But the framework kind of gives you just the base functionalities that you would want to use, and we can customize that to how we want to use it.
I think a lot of that depends on the complexity of your website as well. It's like I teach web development with Girls Who Code group, and I mean, obviously, for simple websites, we're not going to look at any frameworks. If you're looking for a very simple kind of workflow type application, but frameworks are a great way to save time on building fully fledged functionality. And I would also add something that, from the design perspective, since you asked about user experience, Google Material Design is a pretty popular concept in the industry for making flat interfaces. So you can look it up, but there's lots of templates.
Yeah, I use Google Map like the graphic interface before. It's really useful. Thank you.
It's all right. We have a question over there. Do you have a mic already? Oh, okay, great.
So this is in regards to lifestyle. This is for like recent graduates as well. Me being a recent graduate, when applying for jobs and when getting the offer, what do you recommend that we should look for nowadays? Salary, insurance, health insurance, 401k, like what's the most important and what's the least important and what should we be aware of in a way?
I think level of importance will vary person to person. There may be some, depending on your situation, if you have a family, if you don't, if you have to travel, if you're, what I've done and, encouraged friends and peers to do has just been to make sure everything's in there, like what you expected or what the conversation with the recruiter, what that conversation was like, make sure it's reflected in the letter. I always encourage folks, if the number doesn't look right or if you're not comfortable with that salary number, do not be afraid to submit a counter offer or pick up the phone and start to negotiate. I did that with every offer I've received, including internships. So, but it takes, I'm not saying like have someone read it before or, check with someone, practice with someone first. Don't just say, hey, I really don't like this number. It's not going to work. And then another big piece is really benefits. So benefits doesn't necessarily just include like insurance and your traditional pieces. It includes things like, your telework agreement or, health and wellness, whatever. There may be something beyond just dental, medical, vision. I know at our firm we have a legal plan if you want to buy into that, just in case you need it for advice on, I don't know, something happens, you can do that. And PTO, personal time off. Some companies, my first company, I only had 10 days off in a year, but I could have negotiated. Hey, can I get 15? Like, how does that work? Deloitte or other big companies, you may get more. You may get, unlimited. You may have 30 days. And so that could be another place of negotiation, as well as sometimes you get offered a signing bonus. That can be a place to negotiate as well, especially if you find that it's difficult to negotiate salary. But level of importance, I think, will vary person to person.
I would say do your research. All of this data is online, entry level, internship levels. I personally, when I didn't know what to ask and what's the norm, when I took the job as a CTO for a 5-person startup, I didn't know what the balance of equity versus salary. So I've done a lot of research and I figured out, okay, so if you're entering at this early stage, then these are the kind of numbers and percentages you should ask. I asked it. My CEO said no. I printed out the research and I gave it to him, and he said yes. Because I don't think he knew either.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a couple more questions. Anybody on this side of the room? Go ahead.
Hey, so since all of you have like technical background and now hold leadership roles, I was just wondering, what advice do you have for us who are either in research internships or just like very base level internships to keep honing and developing our own leadership skills to like take on more tasks in the company or whatever firm we're working for?
My advice would be, one way to approach it is, outside of the research and outside of the technical stuff, what are you passionate about? What do you enjoy doing? So maybe it's like you love to advocate for literacy and underrepresented communities. There may be organizations, nonprofit organizations, local organizations on campus where you can get involved and get leadership experience there. Another thing that, especially with just the availability of information in the startup world, I took some work as a social media coordinator for an organization that focused on raising awareness about MBAs for families and women with children. And so that wasn't a paid position, but for me it was like, I'm managing this. I did it, in addition to my work, but it gave me the experience that, that I could say I led this effort, I led this team. So even though I had a technical piece, I also still had that leadership part. So I think there's different ways to approach it. My recommendation would be, since it would be in conjunction to what you may be required to do as part of your research, make sure it's something you are passionate about that brings that out in you.
I would say one thing that I have found helpful is sometimes I'll work on my own side project, whether that's I found some code that could really use refactoring, or I just had a tiny idea that I thought would be interesting. And then you kind of get to experience building this feature and presenting it, and maybe it's a tiny feature, but if you can take ownership and leadership of even something really small, it's a good way to practice how you communicate it, how you ask for feedback, how you accept feedback, things like that.
I think there's also a number of ways to think about leadership and management. It's like you can manage people, you can manage projects, you can manage teams, you can manage products. There's so many different things you can manage. So it does come down to like finding what you're passionate about, and passion is such a bad buzzword. But if you take accountability for a project that you feel that speaks to what you enjoy, that's a big part of it, and it could go beyond if in your research internship you could even extend that beyond what you're currently doing for the summer. Like if the research that you're doing, and I've done a number of internships before that have extended beyond the duration of what it should have been, you can take that that research focus, take it beyond the summer. That's something that's possible. I don't know if it's possible, but you can certainly consider that too.
Thank you.
Do we have one more? You want to ask? Yes? Go ahead.
I actually have two questions. Quite loud. So, would you recommend the job as an independent contractor or salary-based as an entry-level job?
Yeah, I would go, well, it depends, right? But I would go for I guess you can do both. Maybe, and maybe not. But it's really good to be in an environment where you can learn and get new skills and have access to training. And especially, it depends what the field is, but in software engineering, I think it's actually a little dangerous to become independent worker right after college, because peer reviews is like the #1 way to learn in software development, and having other people comment on your code and help you grow that way. So that would be kind of my leading.
Also consider the benefits. If you're a 1099 contractor, you don't have insurance unless you can go to your parents. You don't have like a 401k. So those are the number of benefits that a salary position offers that an independent contract you'd have to search on your own. So it's gauging what's important to you and what makes sense.
Okay. And my second question is, you're all very accredited in your career. Now could you answer if you could see where you will be in 10 years? For us, it's a very hard question, but after you've been in the field for 10 years, 5 years, could you answer that question more clearly?
Okay, each one of you. Do you want to know where they want to be in 10 years from now, or where they thought they would be when they got out of school?
Where they want to be at 10 years from now.
Okay, Sakari, where do you want to be in 10 years from now?
I can tell you where I don't want to be better than I can tell you, where I want
That's
to be.
That's fair.
I think what has become my priority is I want to be in a place, I guess 10 years, right? Okay, I want to be in a place of, I like the corporate world, so I like that. I'd like to be in some sort of leadership role there. But I want to be in an environment that provides flexibility, that provides diversity in the work that I do, and also allows me to still do the things I care about, like coming here and speaking to you all, or volunteering at a local school. So I don't know where that would put me at. I don't know what company or position, but 10 years from now, that's what I'd prefer to be doing. Not prefer, I'd like to.
It's interesting you asked that question. I knew exactly where I wanted to be 10 years out of school. And I felt like I actually accomplished that, and then became the face for me. It was like, okay, now what? And guess what? Like, I don't have a plan anymore. And I've gotten used to the idea that that's okay. But yeah, I wanted to be a software engineer for the first half of my career, and I wanted to be a manager for the second half. Like, that was my plan. I got there in like 7 years, and I'm like, now what? But I feel like as you progress further in your career, you're beginning to like have this kind of interest in giving back. And it's been happening a lot to me, and a lot of colleagues that I have as well, is that now I've started doing volunteering a lot more. I've gone back to my school, my alma mater, and trying to do like career panels like these as well. I joined the board, so now I've started I'm actually on the computer science and information systems board for Pace University. I've joined Girls Who Code. I teach with them. So I feel like as I'm going through my career, what I do in the job becomes less of a defining, because I've done so many different things. Like I keep wanting to do more interesting things, but I'm even more interested in figuring out how do I shape the next pipeline of
tech STEM people at all levels and all diversity points as well.
Whitney, 10 years.
To be perfectly frank, I have no idea. 10 years, I have no idea. But I do know like what I want for the next level in my career, and I think I've always known that. Like I know what I'm working towards in the short term. And as time has gone on, I know what I definitely don't want, like what you were saying. I think you start to realize like, oh, I would much rather stay technical than be a manager, or I never want to go back to finance again, or like those kinds of decisions. So I think I can say those pretty definitively for the next 10 years of my career. But in terms of like, am I running my own company? Am I a CTO? Am I doing what I'm doing now? Like, I don't know. But I think that's okay. I mean, I think you should always be working towards something. At least right now, at least, I feel like that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the more sure you are where you're going to be in 10 years, the more you're probably going to go in a divergent direction. So I think I always wanted to be in a sort of, a management or leadership position in a medical devices or biotech company. I've been in startups for a while, and I enjoy learning about the different aspects in what, between like sales, business development, R&D, engineering. That allowed me the opportunity to sort of dip my toes in each of those arenas. I agree with what Helen said, and it just, like, I feel like the older you get, the more you want to dive into, giving back and philanthropy and just making sure that it's not just about you, it's about who else can you impact, who else can you influence, who else, coming into the field, who else is going to make an impact. So I think when you talk about 10 years, I've been considering other aspects beyond career, too.
I want to thank you all for being a great audience, but I'd like you to thank all of these amazing people.
And a big thanks, please, for our moderator, Amy. This does not happen without Amy. This concludes the formal portion of the program, but the panelists have agreed to stay for a few minutes, so if you want to bomb the stage, come up, ask that final question. You're going to be here for a few minutes. This is your opportunity. Welcome, and we're delighted you're here. Thank you.
Guys, were amazing.
You were even better last year.
What time did we start? 2.
Oh, wow.
48.
Oh, yeah. Are we sitting
I feel terrible. So you're right. We're all coming in. Okay.
Thank you.
How tall are you now? 5'2"?
Thank you.
Okay, like 5'5".